All right, fantastic. Take it away.
All right, good. So I'm Brian Deese, Director of the National Economic Council. I want to welcome you all to the White House and just kick us off here before introducing a man who needs no introduction, our Secretary of Transportation. I just want to say a couple things at the top. The first is to thank all of you, your organizations and your teams for what has been a unique and historic effort in collaboration and partnership over the last several months. I was thinking this morning as I was coming in about the convening that we all had about 6 months ago, where we convened around the concept of moving the transportation logistics system centered on the ports to 24/7, around that concept and around that goal, and used it as a organizing device to try to make progress. And I think that we've made enormous progress over the last 6 months collectively, and positioned ourselves to deal with the next new challenge, the next new issue, and I think that that's going to be our life here for some significant period of time. And so today we now come together for the next step, which is how do we go from 24/7 to the 21st century and actually move to transparent digital data optimization that will improve each of your ability to operate, but none of you alone is going to be able to make that happen. And that is at the intersection of where we believe that we in the federal government can play a constructive role. The second point I want to make is your supply chain is a private sector supply chain where companies, organizations, labor work together to make this happen. And so we have always viewed our role at the federal government as coordinating, collaborating, and investing in service of trying to make that private sector supply chain work more effectively. So that, all of which is to say, nothing will work here unless we find places of collaboration where business and labor, the government, state, local, federal, can all find collaborative opportunities. There is no public option solution to any of these problems. It's about coordination and it's about working together. And on that front, I think that, I just want to say a note of thanks to the person to my right here, John Picard, for coming in and serving in the role that he has in working on a day-to-day basis to provide that coordination and collaboration, which I hope has each of you have felt in your engagement over this process. So where we find ourselves today now is with a lot of progress, and I do want to note that progress, that when we were here in September, October, the principal overriding concern was like the big Christmas crisis, the big holiday that was going to fall apart because we weren't going to be able to move goods through the logistics system, and that was the dog that didn't bark because of an extraordinary amount of work from people around the table, etc. And now we face new challenges, but we face challenges in a much better situation if we look at the key metrics that you all follow on a daily basis, but new challenges ahead. So that's where, I think today our hope is that we could really dig in and say, now we've, from 24/7 to 21st century, what's that going to take? What do we need to do? What can we do better on the federal government side? Really try to dig in the same way we did 6 months ago, set that vision, that organizing principle, and then go from there. All sorts of jokes about go with the flow or otherwise leave to others to make over the course of 75 minutes. But I think that's our core goal here today is how do we pivot, set that organizing principle, set this concept out, just like we did with 24/7. We all sat around a table and said, we don't have every answer for how we get for 24/7. But if we did, someone would have figured it out before. We don't have every answer for how we go to 21st century digitally optimized transportation logistics flow here. But if we set out that common goal and parameters, et cetera, hopefully we can make a lot of progress. So with that, let me pause, turn it over to Secretary Buttigieg, and then we will get ourselves into this conversation.
Great. Well, not much I can add to that, Brian. First of all, thank you for making sure, really from the get-go, that these supply chain issues, which have now become a household term, but I think warrant, when you first were ringing the bell about them, have attention at the highest level here. I think it's made a big difference. Grateful to John Kari, my colleague, for all of your work, and to all of you for being here, both in your specific capacities that you bring here, and also on behalf of the many people of your organization, the workers, the mariners, the longshoremen, the drivers, the warehouse folks who actually make up our supply chains in the truest sense of it. And what I really am looking forward to in this discussion is I think this really helps us shine a light on how a public-private partnership should work. It's definitely an example of one of those things that if it doesn't work on a handshake, it doesn't work. Nobody can command this kind of sharing, but what we also know is that it needs to happen. And by rights, our supply chains are mostly locally and or privately operated. I think that's a good thing in America. Nobody wants a federally owned and operated airline or warehouse or dairy or shipping company, but we need to figure out how the federal interacts with the private sector. We've seen a lot of progress through the collaboration since that convening that Brian mentioned. Some of the things we're counting, like the 70% decrease in the long-dwelling containers, that I think shows that bringing attention to this can matter. The simple fact that Christmas was not in fact canceled, that a lot went into ensuring that things got to where they needed to be in a timely way, and just the creativity that's gone into things like the pop-up container yard concept that has allowed us to establish temporary solutions in addition to of course, the very long haul, very big picture working that we're doing with the infrastructure law and the investments that we're making everywhere from Long Beach, where we're funding new on-dock rail, to, I recently had a chance to highlight Long Beach, Mississippi. I don't know if you know about them, population 19,000. Where we're funding some highway work that we think will make a very important difference in that particular piece of the supply chain and everywhere in between. But there's a lot more work to do, and today I think is a great step forward when it comes to that 21st century style operation that Brian mentioned earlier. I think people might commonly assume more than is there in terms of the level of data visibility that really exists. And what we know is if an importer doesn't know the location of their cargo, or if a warehouse doesn't have visibility of what's coming in, or a truck driver doesn't actually know when in a 7-hour window is the right time to hit the port gate or to hit the warehouse, that has consequences in terms of shipping times, in terms of business costs, and very importantly right now as we're battling inflation, in terms of the prices that people pay at home, which is why there is also just a very important kitchen table impact to this work. So with that, we're teaming up to launch this initiative, Flow. Freight logistics optimization works. I'm going to try to memorize that, what it stands for, but I think we'll just go with Flow, so to speak, at the outset. And just so glad to have you here at the White House, and those who are joining us virtually as well, because even though it's not always flashy, this kind of data sharing and infrastructure, I do think is as fundamentally important as the concrete brick and mortar work that people might see or understand better. And there is precedent for this. So if you think about aviation, there is a SIAS, don't ask me the acronym behind that, but it's a data sharing entity that allows industry to improve safety and create the kind of visibility that different players need. And that's something I think we can establish here. So I'm really enthused about this. We're ready to team up with you and eager to discuss exactly how to make it work and how we can hopefully make this something that more and more people will want to be part of and contribute to. So with that, I think we'll turn to discussion of progress to date, and I'll hand it back to Brian.
Great. All right. We're going to get into this. I think the way we're going to try to do this is just to start with what I would refer to as a mark-to-market. Let's get an update from a set of you who've been at this from the beginning, where we are, what we're seeing, and we're going to try to do that quickly, get that on the table so that we're level set, and then turn to the flow concept, how it's going to work, what you all think we need to be prioritized, and my hope is then sort of leave with a real clear sense of how we take this flow concept and drive it into execution. So we'll start on the mark-to-market side, and we'll start with Mario and Gene, who are literally on the ground and at the operating level. I'll start with you, Mario. If you could just give us the sort of state of play from where you sit, where we've come and where you think we are.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you all for being here this morning. So I think you're seeing the common theme that we're talking here: progress, collaboration. And I think these great examples of what we've done in Southern California with the leadership of this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, Supply Chain Disruption Task Force, the NEC, the DOT, and the very key stakeholders in the conflict. So suffice to say, as you know, in Southern California, it was like we're under the microscope there with regard to the nation's largest port complex, responsible for 40% of the nation's imports, and of course, a lot of writing about congestion and bottlenecks. But the good news that I'd like to say is particularly 4 action steps that were taken in the San Pedro Bay complex. Number 1, we identified vacant land, staging land. We talked about the pop-up. Port of Long Beach moved forward back last year with a beginning example of allocating 20 acres. Now that's 90 acres. And again, with the partnership we have with Port of LA, that complex has about approximately a little bit more than an excess of 200 acres of staging area. So that's great progress there. Number 2, we talked about expanded gate hours, Brian, the 24/7 concept. You know, a work in progress, but as Brian referenced, what it did do is expand gate hours and the collaborative spirit that we've had to make sure that, again, the marine terminal operators and the stakeholders and the supply chain through the warehouses, up to the warehousing, have to expand those hours of operations. Long Beach began with a project, pilot project at TTI, followed once after we were here in October by Phoenix Marine on the Port of Los Angeles side. And recently, another terminal just indicated that they're going to further expand the 3 to 7 a.m. gate hours, which is the hoot shift. So there's progress. Number 3, the long road container fee that was passed by the port by way of tariff. We haven't collected that fee, but the progress has been in the success that the stakeholders, you were there, you made the tour with us, both ports. It has been a tremendous reduction in the long road container at that plus 9 days. We had, beginning of the conversation, we had like 50% of containers at our terminals were there 9 days or more. So thankfully, that's been tremendously reduced. I think the Secretary mentioned we're up to the 70th percentile in that reduction. Tremendous progress there. Third is the empty container question. Like the import container, we had severe capacity constraints at the marine terminal operators when we started the conversation in September and fall of last year. That number represented upwards of 50% of the containers at the marine terminal operators, on the average, in the San Pedro Bay complex, empty containers to sit in. The good news is we have moved forward with substantially reducing that. Again, for the Port of Long Beach, that figure now comes down to the low 33 percentile. I think Los Angeles also made tremendous success. The point being is because of the collaborative conversations, everybody has rolled up their sleeves and made efforts to move the cart. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. It's not just moving information and data. It's moving the cargo. Most of you who are here from the shipping side, that's the bottom line. So, and last, I want to say in terms of specifically of Long Beach, we completed finally at the last phase of a major endeavor we've had over the last 8 years, as Long Beach Container Terminal. That last phase completed in the fall of last year or summer of last year now basically means that Long Beach Container Terminal by itself now has an additional million in terms of container capacity with a total of 3.5 million. And of course, both ports have moved forward with the respective dashboards and making sure that we have that data information for the stakeholders. So that's a lot of progress there, and we'll talk more about it in the second component of this conversation. But let me just end by 2 concerns that we have. Number 1, the issue of rail. That's a significant concern for the San Pedro Bay complex. Compared to moving of rail year to year from 2021 as opposed to 2020, it's a very concerning in terms of the low number. We're like around 20-21%. of rail use in the St. Peter Bay complex on the average. Specific to Long Beach, I can tell you that the container I just referenced, Long Beach Container Terminal. Last week, we had a conversation, John, as you may be aware, people in the stakeholder conversation. That terminal had 6,000 rail containers just sitting there waiting for rail cars. Now, here we are today, that number has increased to 12,000. Just one container terminal, rail cars or rail containers ready, waiting for rail cars. Now, if you add another terminal, TTI, just on Long Beach alone, we have more containers sitting there idling, waiting for rail cars, than if you have Seattle, Tacoma, and Oakland put together. Add to LA's number, I mean, that's really an acceptable number. So Liz has been made to come into a stakeholder meeting to address that specific issue. So that's, again, an issue that I'm very excited that we're going to tackle. And last, the developments are happening right now in Asia. We all know factories are starting to close in the Shenzhen area. So you have ports like Shenzhen, Qingdao, and Yantian, major ports of origin to this complex. Now, you know what's going to happen next. Port there closes. Here we go with the domino effect, and we're going to start over again. So that's very concerning. And again, in the interest of time, I'll end my commentary. But the bottom line, in terms of what we've been able to do at the St. Peter Bay complex to address these significant capacity constraints we had going back to October, I think it's fair to say we've made a lot of improvement. Again, mission's not accomplished yet. We're still going to roll up our sleeves and keep moving the needle here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. Gene, love the perspective from you, and in addition to where things stand, also how you think about the data bolting in here. I remember you've been from our first conversation saying 24/7 and but data. So give us your sort of mark to market and what you're prioritizing right now.
Sure. I think all of the things that Mario just covered are very important. Director to Secretary Buttigieg. We've got latent capacity still at these ports. So it's a match of probably 12 handoffs across the supply chain that have to get more in sync. Some of that is done through great work efforts, these relationships that we've developed over decades, but also the flow of data and the importance of those handoffs. A couple of examples. While we've cut imports on our docks in half since that October 13th meeting, and we've cut long aging containers by 70%, we still have more than half of our truck gates that go unused every single day. That means we could theoretically double our truck business tomorrow if we used every gate. Now, there are nuances within that. Do you have all the right assets in place at the proper time? Is everybody on deck? Is there space at the warehouse, et cetera, et cetera? All of that needs to continue in our clear focus of these handoffs. Another area that's of great importance, many of us have talked about nationwide, we're short 80,000 truckers, and the American Trucking Association has to say. In Southern California, we don't have a shortage of truckers, shortage of good jobs. More than 660,000 commercial driver's licenses have been issued in the state of California, and yet, of the 9,000 truckers that call on a weekly basis at our port complex, we could probably use about 3,000 or 5,000 more. So how do we attract, recruit, and retain drivers in this port drayage space, which are typically some of the lower level jobs? They're secondary or tertiary markets for the asset of the truck cab itself. These are folks that get paid on a per run basis, and others who have had prices driven down over the past 2 decades in procurement processes that are now a little bit archaic and aged. On the warehousing side, do we have enough space? We got great talent in this room today to talk about how it's important to capture that flow much farther upstream, to understand cycle times and the movement of cargo through those facilities. Because of all of the thrust of this import volume based on how much the American consumer is buying, we've commingled fulfillment of cross-dock with distribution and with pure warehousing in Southern California. Yet we still boast 2 billion square feet under roof, the largest complex of any in the world today. So as you can see from just a couple of these areas where progress has been made, it's been done with rolling up your sleeves, elbow grease, spreadsheets, and phone calls, not necessarily using the data that's been out there for so long, and in many cases in a silo fashion. So how do we break down some of those silos? How do we give people confidence that the data won't be weaponized whether it be in the private sector, the public, or in the labor workforce. That's a key hurdle to get over for all of us. And in our views of data sharing, we don't want to use anything proprietary. Generic data in combination with that of CBP and the U.S. Automated Manifest Systems data that gives you a real clean look at cargo that's been loaded to vessels early on in Asia, so we can plan that staffing need as well as the equipment load. And really, in summation, this all comes down to the competitiveness of the American economy and the American company. 90% of trade moves on water today. There's no getting away from this. There will be shifts in markets. There will be needs that change. There will be things that we have to pivot to on a dime, like we've been doing for the past 2 years. Unforeseen changes, but we need to be able to start seeing around corners. How can we anticipate these changes, and how do we flex better? In China, after having worked there for a number of years, even if a terminal shuts down in South China, there's the ability to go right across the Pearl River Delta to Qiwan, to Nansha, to Dongguan. Cargo will move. It's not going to be just a stoppage. Qingdao is in the far northern reaches of Bohai Bay. There's opportunities between Qingdao and Shanghai. If Ningbo has a problem, you can truck 3 hours away to the Shanghai Deep Sea Port at Yangshan. So there are always ways we can move cargo, but every day in the supply chain there's something that gives us a headwind. And we just have to find a way, the American supply chain, to be more resilient. Part of that is the data play. Having an opportunity for a nationwide view of the American exporter to see where those opportunity maps may lie. How do you match up containers with truck and rail service? Combine those with shipping schedules in order to effect a smoother look at getting the American farmer and manufacturer back in the international game is really what Flow is all about. Reducing those barriers, which will reduce costs, which will give opportunity to the American company who exports, is key to this entire conversation. So I think this network of folks that we have assembled here today exemplifies what that effort has been like over the last 2 years, and more importantly, since the federal government started back in February last year, when the president was inaugurated, we started with the EO and supply chain and the designation of the Disruption Task Force, bringing on the port envoy to have these meetings off of your meeting, Secretary, on the 15th of July, which captured the essence of what the private sector supply chain and its public entities were seeing, what we needed to get across, how we needed to move forward and get over some of these hurdles. The federal government's role in this, in my opinion, is absolutely key because you have that great convening power. And you've got minds in this room like Samira Fazli and Liz Reynolds and so many others, Brendan Duke, who have brought ideas to the table from different looks, different concepts that have allowed us to really push the envelope forward. So that engagement has to stay. And whether it be through FACA committees, roundtables like this, ongoing conversations that we have daily with representatives from agencies across the deck here in the administration would be very important. And America's competitiveness counts on it. The American consumer got us through the most difficult time moving outside of the COVID domain, where we were really nervous about what was going on. 5.7% annualized growth last year, the best retail season ever and the best retail year ever, but there's so much more to improve upon. And it's these building blocks within the supply chain that will be connected by data that takes us to it.
Right.